expectation that the effort that one organization puts in should be proportional to the potential risk and the impact that it has on products and services that you deliver to the customers. So this is pretty much what we see the standard sharing with us. And if you go to slide 6, the objective of the standard is really to make sure that you have confidence in your organization's ability to provide your customers with conforming goods and services and to enhance customer satisfaction. So this concept of risk in the context of the standard really relates to any uncertainty in achieving these objectives. So again, if you take a look at risk, what the standard is asking you to do is to think about what would not allow you, the organization, to consistently provide customers with what you have committed to do and also enhance customer satisfaction. And in general, that is the objective of this standard and how they are looking at risk-based thinking. So let's change gears a little bit and let's focus on what is risk-based thinking. And it's interesting, I've been getting this question asked to me all along, what is risk-based thinking? And I think it's important that we just have a brief conversation on what it is. Risk-based thinking, quite frankly, is something that we all do automatically and often subconsciously. Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, most of us in organizations do think about what could go wrong. Now, it's interesting in that risk has always been implicit in ISO 9001. However, with the new revision that it's our expectation will be in place in the fall of 2015, it has made it very explicit, and you will find that it's built in the entire management system. If you go clause by clause in this standard, you find elements of risk-based thinking and the expectation of identification of opportunities to mitigate that risk. So this risk-based thinking is part of the process approach, and risk-based thinking really makes preventative action part of the routine. Now, just a comment, risk in many, many cases is always considered to be negative, but in many cases, some risk-based thinking can also then help identify opportunities, and this can be considered to be a more positive side of the risk. So one of the things that I'm going to ask you to take away is this whole concept of preventative action. So you ought to ask yourself, why in an organization should I adopt risk-based thinking? So first of all, you want to improve customer confidence and satisfaction. That is one of the benefits of risk-based thinking. You want to assure consistency of the quality of goods, products, and services that you do. Third, by doing risk-based thinking, you can provide a culture of prevention and improvement in all of your key process steps. And frankly, a lot of successful companies that we work with intuitively take a risk-based approach to how they make decisions. So what should you do in an organization? You do need to identify risks and opportunities in your organization, and it depends on what the term context is put into this slide. Context refers to the fact that your organization is different than somebody else's organization. And the risks and opportunities are really dependent upon the products and services that you deliver. It's dependent upon the internal processes that you have set up to deliver those and some of the maturity issues that you may or may not have with those processes. Interestingly enough, as you go through ISO 9001:2015, it does not mandate or require that you have a full formal risk assessment program. What that means is that you don't need a risk management procedure. It doesn't mean that you have risk management offices. It doesn't require that you have what I have in italics there, risk registers. However, the term risk registers will come up later in my presentation because I do believe that as a model, it provides a very convenient way to document risk-based thinking. The other thing that I think would be very, very helpful would be if organizations would take a look at ISO 31000. It is risk management principles and guidelines. And the feedback that we give to a number of clients is that it is a useful reference that they can use. But again, the standard does not mandate that you have to apply 31000 to your risk-based thinking. So, continuing on what you need to do. First of all, you do need to analyze, prioritize risks and opportunities in your organization for each one of your key processes. You need to identify what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. After identification, you do need to plan actions to address these risks. You need to ask yourself, how can I avoid or eliminate the risk? And if that's not possible, is there a way you could mitigate that risk should it ever happen? Once you have a set of plans, you are to implement them. In other words, take action. Follow-up then would require for you to say, what was the effectiveness of the action that I've taken? And then learn from experience, meaning continual improvement. So the key points to remember is, first, risk-based thinking is really preventative action. One of the interesting things that, for those of you who have gone through the current revision of ISO 9001-2015, you will notice that there is no clause for preventative action. And so the assumption moving forward with ISO 9001 that risk-based thinking is indeed preventative action. And the other thing that I'd like you to take away and think about is that risk-based thinking is really everybody's business. It's not just management, and it's really effective if it can become an integral part of the organization where everybody is taking a look at what could go wrong and what are the opportunities that one could implement to prevent future issues with key processes in your organization. So again, what I'd like to do is I'm going to switch a little bit, and I want to have a conversation about what is risk. Now, there are many, many formal definitions of risk, and here's one. Risk is the possibility of events or activities impeding the achievement of an organization's strategic and operational objectives. So again, if you notice, there is some key terms in here. One is the notion it's the possibility of events or activities. So later on you'll hear me talk about the notion of probability. And then the other thing is the impeding of an achievement, meaning how serious could it be. So again, probability and seriousness are two terms that are key moving forward in terms of what is risk. So there are a couple other simple definitions that I've used in the past. One is it could be the volatility of potential outcomes. In other words, how bad could things be? And the other one that I sometimes will put in my presentations is this little simple one, is how surprised do you really want to be? Frankly, if you don't do some level of risk-based thinking, you could be surprised in the future when all of a sudden things don't go.
Bob, can you hear me? Bob? Hello? Bob? Nancy?
Hey, wait a minute, everybody,
Hello?
yeah, everybody can see us right now.
Everybody can what? Oh, I see. There's something went wrong with the sound. I don't know what the heck, what is wrong.
Okay, listen, why don't you just carry on with the presentation? You do it.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm,
Hang on, everybody can hear everything we're saying.
okay. Okay. Bob, can you hear me?
Angelo?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Angelo, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm going to make you
Okay,
present.
you want me to continue, Angelo?
Yeah, just continue.
Okay. I'm back online. I apologize for, obviously, I lost my my ability to project. So I am currently on slide 16, and I hope you can see that. Where I had left off is the definition of risk is really a two-parameter model. One is severity and probability. And I'd like to just take a look at this in a couple of different ways. If I go to, if I move to slide 17, here's a simplistic model. It's a it should be a quantitative one. If you notice in the bottom table, you'll see where harm and probability, I've scaled from 1 to 5 with different levels, probability from 1 to 5. And up in the colored blocks, you can see risk being determined as high, medium, and low by the colors themselves. And in general, what you see is that risk will increase from the bottom left to the upper right. And so for each element in there, you can then define what the level of harm and occurrence are, and you can plot them on this chart. What we see a lot of people doing is that however they define the various risk regions, typically something that is considered in a red region would be generally unacceptable. That which is in green is generally acceptable. That in the middle, sometimes individuals have determined that as low as reasonably possible. What that means is in that section, one ought to take a look at those risks themselves, and in some cases, you can make a business decision that maybe they are as low as reasonably possible. There's another way to take a look at it, and it's more of a qualitative approach on your screen in slide 19, and have a client that likes to use low, medium, and high. And in essence, it's the same thing as the prior one, where you see increasing risk here going from an upper left to a bottom right. Either one I have seen work quite well with clients that we have worked with. It's really what you as an organization would like to use to define risk. In either case, it's a two-parameter assessment, severity and probability. One of the things I've done is I've actually gone and taken a look at some information on what are called risk registers. And I am going to bring up the topic of risk registers because I think it is a model, maybe not the only model, where you can actually document what risk-based thinking is. If you go back through the standard does require you to be able to demonstrate that you have assessed risks, the severity and probability of them, that you've reviewed them, done a certain level of mitigation, and then going back and taking a look at them again. If you look at risk registers themselves, they can become a very, very simple document, which is the second bullet here. It's really a spreadsheet. It could be a database. It's really, at the end of the day, a table that you would use. And in the tables themselves, you can provide a lot of information in just a few pages. So what do you typically see with a risk register? And I'll go through this very, very quickly. Just realize there is no standard list of components, but typically you're going to have some dates in the risk register or when things have happened. You do need to describe the risk. You can have different risk types, business, projects, stages, however you want to do it. In this case, we take a look at the key processes in an organization. Here's a likelihood of occurrence. In this case, we talked about low, medium, and high. You could use a 1 through 5 scale. You could use any scale you would like. But likelihood of occurrence is really the probability. Severity. You need to be able to assess what is the impact that this could have on the goods or services, products that you provide to customers. Countermeasures. In other words, what are the actions that you're going to be taking to prevent, reduce, maybe move the risk? Could have some contingency plans. Normally you want to have who is the owner of that item, and hopefully someplace in there you do have a status. And then finally, you can put in whatever other columns you as an organization deem to be important in terms of metrics that you want to use to take a look at risks. I went on the internet and I pulled down just a couple two examples that I found there. The one that I'm showing right now on the slide is one where they took a look at risks determined by low, medium, and high. They have this little table at the bottom left determining, low, low, high, high, and the scales in between. And if you come up here, you can see the very, very first line, supplier does not meet delivery deadlines, the probability is medium, the impact is high, the exposure or the combination of the impact and the probability is high. This organization has put what they call mitigation plans in place, meaning what are they doing, what actions they're taking. And this company here also put in contingencies in terms of what could happen and what would they do if this problem occurred. I'm going to move to the next slide, which is another example, slightly different one. The only reason I put this one in is to notice that probability and the impact, here they're using numbers to define it. You can see the risk factor is the multiplication of the two, and you can see from 20 to 10 here. This one is in red because there's some activity going on here. But again, you can see managed response, what are the actions, who's responsible, the last review date, and the current status is in this one here as well. So there is no standard format to risk registers. We've seen different kinds. You can use qualitative or quantitative metrics to define what the risk levels are, and you can put in different columns to identify what the opportunities are to mitigate those risks. So I'd like to shift gears again, and I want to talk about how do you integrate all of this risk-based thinking into the process approach itself. So for those of you who are familiar with the process approach, what I have on slide 27 shouldn't come to any surprise to you. The purpose of the process approach is really to enhance two dimensions. One, organizational effectiveness and efficiency in order for you to meet your defined objectives. And hopefully by doing this you enhance customer satisfaction and you meet their requirements. So a process approach is pretty simple. The box in the middle is really your process. And what a process is a bunch of interrelated, interacting activities and control methods. All processes have an input. All processes have an output. And what you then try to do is do monitoring and measuring of the inputs, processes, and the outputs as well. And the outcome of that is you can then define the effectiveness of the process. Did you achieve what you thought you wanted to deliver to the customer in terms of output? And the efficiency of the process is, did the results achieved meet what the resources were that you used or intended to use? So if done correctly, we want to have processes that are both effective and efficient in order to meet customer expectations. However, sometimes things don't go well. Slide 28 is a classic slide that I've used in the past, where if you take a look at a development process feeding into an operational process, many times there appears to be a wall of confusion between the two. Now, in putting this slide up, I can honestly say to you, I have been on both sides of this wall. I have developed processes where, quite frankly, when I delivered them to operations, well, let's just say it didn't meet the operational expectations. Some of which was due to the fact that we had to meet certain customer schedules, and indeed what was delivered to operations was indeed not what it probably should have been. I have been on the other side of that wall in terms of operations on the receiving end, and at the same time received things that I thought were inappropriate or not ready to be put into operations. All of this, quite frankly, in this little picture, this little cartoon, suggests that there is something missing in between these two operations, development or operation. I could even put a slide up here between marketing and design engineering. The point being is this little picture, this little cartoon, really points out that process models sometimes have difficulty because of the relationship between two different functions. If we move to slide 29, here's another example of what some organizations may experience. We see these four departments, A, B, C, and D. Department A is titled Interested Parties or Requirements. These are customer requirements. Department B is looking at policies and objectives. C is doing planning. D is realization, and ended up with unintended outputs. And what you see here in this little cartoon is just this barrier between these four departments. What the process approach is trying to do is break down those barriers and have linkages from one department or one process step from the beginning, from, in this case, Department A through D, with the expectations that the outputs are effective and efficient. So you may say to me, you know, how do you go look at this, and how do you perceive this, and oh, by the way, then how do you move forward with risk-based thinking? Slide 31 actually is a slide that builds, and probably in PDF form you see the final output, but what you see on slide 31 is what is typically called the SIPOC model. You see suppliers on the left with inputs into a process. Process has the major elements and boundaries. There's an output, and that process has a customer. When we talk to a number of our clients, one of the things that we work with them is to understand what are all the necessary elements for a process itself, other than just simply saying inputs and outputs. And what we like to do is we do like to generate a model that takes a look at what kind of manpower in terms of training and skills are required, what kind of measures, metrics are you going to put in place for the process, what kind of materials do you really need, what are the methods, procedures, in other words, how are you going to do it, what kind of equipment, machinery that you might need within that process, and what is the environment. It could be, if you're in a medical products world, you know, what kind of clean environments do you need, what kind of conditions. And so we generate this little model that you see here on the screen, and then we ask our clients or our customers to think about what could go wrong with the output. What are the actual risks? What could go wrong in not achieving that output? And it's interesting, as we talk to a number of our clients, you know, they're not sure where to start looking at this. And so what we do is we go up and ask them, is there any issue in manpower? How about in terms of metrics or trends? Are you measuring the right stuff? We ask them to think about materials. What could go wrong there? We ask them to think about the procedures, the methods that they may have in place. Are there issues with the equipment? Are there issues with the environment? And of course we ask, you know, any other issues with inputs. And in a very, very short period of time, what we've been able to achieve by taking a look at this risk-based thinking approach is, once we have the model of what are all the inputs to the process, we ask a simple thing, what could go wrong? And by going through the various inputs, in short order, we can identify all of the potential risks that may go into not achieving the outputs. And so this is one of the models that we use in terms of risk-based thinking, working with people. So I have now up on the screen on slide 32, this is a kind of a model that we have used with other people that seems to be effective. What we've done is we've used this, it's actually a spreadsheet. We identify the key steps, the names, the dates, initial update. We identify the various risks, and you can see here in step 1 we had identified 4 risks. Step 2, 3. This should be step 3, sorry for the typo. We have 5. We have severity, probability, and risk. We have action plans, and then we come back and we reassess them again. Here's an example of what it might look like at a very, very high level. And let's just take a look at step 1 and take a look at the 4 risks. We've arbitrarily assigned some severity and probability levels. You're going to notice that sometimes, I will, highlight any time I see a 4 or a 5. Here we're using the scale 1 through 5. The reason I like to do that is I do get concerned when I see a 5 in one of those columns. I just want to make sure I clearly understood them. And then here you see under risk, I like to call this a stoplight chart. The numbers range from 9, 4, 20 to 5. Clearly in red you see this third item in here where we do need an action plan. You're going to notice that here on the 4, no plan was required, and that in yellow made arbitrarily that this risk here was as low as reasonably possible. But even with this 5, I went back and verified the probability number, and if that's okay, we would move forward. It turns out that in this case, in this set of step 1, only one of the items require an action plan, pointing out that all risks are not necessarily equal, and that only certain ones at certain times do require some sort of activity. Later on, we went back and we reassessed the risks, and you can say we still had the 4s and the 5s under the probability, but the severity was reduced by the actions that we had taken specifically in this line here. So this is an example of a proposed risk model. It is an Excel spreadsheet. You can use tables, but the key is you can have a lot of information on a sheet like this very, very quickly. It is documented information as the standard does require in terms of taking a look at risk and what are the opportunities for improvement. So let's come back and ask the question, why is risk like Swiss cheese? Why did I ever propose this? And if you go to slide 35, I've taken this information from information you will see in the aerospace arena in their handbook. And I thought it was a really, really excellent model to understand. If you take a look at these gray blocks, they start from contract requirements to design, acquisition, process development, readiness, test, and operational and service. And the notion of Swiss cheese and risk is if the holes line up, like this upper right corner, what happens is if you don't deal with the risks, sooner or later the project could fail, you could have customer returns. And when you stand back and look at it and you think about if these various screens have holes in them to get to the customer, where would be the best case for you to address the risks? And clearly, addressing risks early in the development of a process or a product makes a lot more sense. You have more influence in this point. At this point, the costs are definitely going to be lower. And as you go down this product realization stream or operational stream, which is what the new standard calls it, once you get out and you left your organization, you have very, very low influence to fix it, and typically your costs are higher. And so working with a number of clients, we stress the need for not allowing risks to move downstream. And we spend a lot of time up front making sure that we clearly understand customer expectations that are translated into designs that do meet the expectations of the customer. And hopefully we can mitigate a lot of potential problems downstream in the product realization and eliminate the possibility that something would get to the customer. So that's why I used a risk cheese analogy, that we need to understand that if you allow risk to transfer, you're only going to probably increase the cost of your products or services, and your ability to respond will go down. So let's talk about now integrating this risk-based thinking with the process approach and continual improvement, which is really Plan, Do, Check, Act. I'm sure many of you online know all about Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's a methodology. It's a simple tool that one can use. You plan what to do, how to do it. You do it, meaning you execute, you implement it. You check the results of what happened after you do it. Then you act in terms of an improvement standpoint by changing your plan. And oh, by the way, the fact that this is a circle is obvious that it is a continual process, and frankly, you're never done. So let's take a look at what it might look like, and I extracted this directly from the standard itself. When you think about planning your processes, you really ought to start considering the impact that risk has on the plan. You then implement that process, and if you notice, there are inputs coming in from the right, there are inputs coming in from the left, there are outputs going to the right, and it starts with a process prior to the process you're talking about, and it goes to another process. You then check and monitor how you did. You come back and incorporate improvements as necessary, and you plan again. And so what you see here is the process approach, which is really inputs into a process with outputs, having a supplier and a customer. You have the notion of risk in your planning methodology for implementing the process, and you see the classic Plan, Do, Check, Act model, which is really a continual improvement model for the process and all of the processes that you have in your quality management system. Now, one of the questions that has come up is, how do you integrate this into an organization? What are the forcing functions that would require an organization to make sure that one integrates process with risk with this continual improvement model? And one of the things I want to share with you on slide 39 is really the fact that in this new standard, management review input has been slightly modified. I'm not going to go through all of the requirements for management review that I have listed here. Many of them, if not all of them, you will find in the current standard, which is 9001-2008. But in red, you're going to notice there is a section D, and the effectiveness of actions taken to address risks and opportunities. And it references back to clause 6.1. So in your management review, there has to be, per this standard, a review of the effectiveness of actions that you have taken to address risks and opportunities. So by virtue of this required input to management review, it really does require you to act in a continual way in terms of implementing risk-based thinking in a continual methodology in your process outputs. So this is the final slide on conclusions. Risk-based thinking is an element in the process approach. It's clearly throughout the ISO 9001-2015 standard. You need to remember it is an input into management review. It is a critical one. It is an element of continual improvement, and it's focused on prevention. And I think that's a key point, that you do this to prevent undesired effects. And then finally, you do need to be able to demonstrate risk-based thinking. The standard requires what's called documented information. I only propose in this presentation that a risk register or some sort of a table is an excellent way for you to document that you have done it, and it validates that you as an organization does have a continual improvement. So with that, Angelo, I'm going to hand it back to you for any questions.
Sure, Bob. Thank you very much. And the first thing I want to do is apologize for the technical problem that we had. I got an email from GoToMeeting, who's hosting the webinar, and they had a little glitch on their end. They interrupted us for about 4 minutes, and they apologized. I guess the problem is when there's a lot of connections, sometimes things don't work as they should, and we had over 600 connections today. So, Bob, if you could, I had a couple of people request. We kind of missed slide 15 with that technical issue. Can you please go back to maybe start on slide 14 and transition to 15 to 16 and just go through that slide, because we missed that.
Certainly. 1 second.
Yeah.
Glad to do it. Let me get there. Is this the one where you want me to start, Angelo?
Start on 14 and transition to 15 and 16.
Let me move one back. Let me, Angelo, just I'm gonna start on 13, because this is where we start talking about risk and what is risk. So let me start with this one, Angelo.
Sure.
So this is where we transitioned into a conversation about what is risk, and I defined the fact that risk is the possibility of events and activities impeding the achievement of an organization's strategic and operational objectives. What I pointed out was this notion of possibility. I started with possibility, and we're going to talk about it in terms of probability. And you also see the word impeding the achievement of an objective, meaning what's the severity if this event happens. So slide 13 begins introducing the notion that risk can be modeled with 2 parameters. I moved on and I said I also had some simple definitions of risk. One is it's the volatility of potential outcomes. And then, of course, I have my favorite one, is how surprised do you really want to be? And I put that in there because if you don't start thinking about risk you're certainly going to be surprised when the outcome is not what you had anticipated. So, that's sort of my little tongue-in-cheek definition of risk. I then moved into this notion, and then why is risk like Swiss cheese? And Angelo, as I said earlier, I defined it a little bit later on, but we can talk about it later, Angelo, if people would like me to do that. But I think people were back online when I brought this up again.
Right. Okay.
And then what I did, Angelo, was I defined the two parameter in terms of seriousness and probability. I then quickly went through this quantitative way of taking a look at where risk is really going from the bottom left to the upper right. It's quantitative in that I defined harm in a scale from 1 to 5, probability in a scale of 1 to 5. Again, it's up to the organization to decide, what's a high risk, medium risk, and low risk. I then quickly talked about the fact that if typically it's in what you determine to be high risk, it's typically unacceptable and one would expect someone to take action. In the bottom left, in the green section, typically acceptable. And that in the middle, you have to make some business decisions whether or not you believe it's as low as reasonably practical and whether or not you're going to take some sort of action against it. The notion here is that not all risks are equal, and the actions then should be proportionate to the level of the risk.
Right.
And finally, Angelo, I'll just do one more slide. You can also look at it qualitatively here, and I've had clients use this type of a model from low to high. Again, you assess risk increasing from an upper left to a bottom right based upon a 3-parameter probability model and a 3-parameter severity model.
Okay.
So Angela, hopefully that.
Yeah, that is good. That kind of takes care of the little gap that we had there.
Okay.
For everybody that heard me, I was getting a little nervous there, so I apologize for the 4-letter word that I used that started with an S. Sorry about that. So we have some questions that have come in. Actually, a lot of questions that have come in. And let's start with a question that talks about is risk management, risk-based thinking, if you will, similar to business continuity planning or contingency planning, if you will. Can you use the current protocol around contingency planning, business continuity planning to satisfy the risk-based thinking requirements in ISO 9015?
Well, that's a good question. My first reaction is yes. At one of my prior companies, we did contingency planning, and basically what it was to what would impede our ability to deliver a product or service. In this case, it was a product. And every process step had to go back through, and they did a risk assessment for that specific process step. We added them all up, and then we made some business decisions on which one of those risks we were going to address during the year. So if you do continuity risk contingency planning, the expectation would be that you would be looking at all your key process steps, identifying what could go wrong. You can use a simple severity probability model, and then at a management review or appropriate management forum disposition, what risks you as a business decide you want to mitigate or work on.
Right.
So yes, I think if you already have it in place, just to take a look at the standard, and you're probably already doing risk-based thinking.
So there was a lot of questions, Bob, probably about 40 or 50 questions around FMEAs, and why not use FMEAs as kind of the jumping board, if you want, for risk management, risk assessment, risk-based thinking? Can you comment on that in terms of usage of FMEAs?
Sure, Angela. We get that question all the time. If you as an organization are using FMEAs, my feedback would be continue to use them for this activity. What I caution you is the standard requires you to do risk-based thinking for all of your key process steps. So a lot of companies do FMEAs for product design, product development, but you can use FMEAs for processes. You can do process FMEAs on your operational activities. You can do it on purchasing. You can do them on supply chain. If you provide services post-product delivery, you could do it on that. The standard requires you to do risk-based thinking for all your key processes. If you as a company are using FMEAs as a tool, my feedback, continue to use them, but make sure that you touch on all of your key process steps.
Right. Very good. So a few questions around documentation of risk-based thinking. A lot of, we all, based on the presentation that you made a couple of months ago, that in terms of the documentation required, the ISO 2015 doesn't look like it's going to require any procedures associated with risk management or risk assessment. So the question is, in your opinion, since the standard doesn't require documented procedures around risk, what do companies going to require in terms of records and maybe any documentation?
Bear with me, Angelo.
Okay.
I put up on the screen. I hope people can see this. Slide 31. You're correct. The standard itself does not require any documented procedures or work instructions. However, if you do a risk analysis, and I'm going through it, and I'm stopping on methods, if all of a sudden you realize that you are not getting the intended output of your product, and the issue is that there is an inconsistent delivery of the methods you use in your process, then one of the risks that you have is a lack of procedures, documented procedures or work instructions. So while the standard doesn't require to have any procedures documented, there is a little caveat in there where it is up to you as a business to determine whether or not you need them. Coming from an operational manufacturing background, having run operations around the clock with many people, I find that it is way too risky not to have clear work instructions or procedures that are consistent with the competency of the people you have doing the job. So it's really up to you as an organization to determine whether or not having procedures is a risk. And then you make the decision whether or not you're going to implement them or not.
Very good. Thank you. Time for a couple more questions. So there's a question around risk in terms of risk-based thinking. If you identify a high-risk item, what is the expectation? What is the urgency or speed that the organization needs to react to show that you have an effective risk management program?
That's a good question. If you identify a risk as a high risk, clearly management at management review has to address it. Now, you used the word, Angelo, in your question, urgency. I would like to think that urgency is important for a high-risk item, but I also recognize that in some organizations, both small and big, you may not at that time have the resources necessary to address it immediately. And so in some cases, organizations may make a business decision that they will address it, but it will have to be at a later date when they have the necessary resources, to do it. And it could be in terms of people, it could be in terms of money, but at least they acknowledge it immediately, and that they put a plan in place immediately to address it. It doesn't mean that it will be addressed the next day, because, as I said, you may need resources. You may need a person who can only fix that one issue might be working another customer issue, and you need to wait till that finishes up. That's the purpose of management review.
Right.
You know, you've got to come back because addressing risks is a business decision, and management has to make a decision based upon the severity of the problem and the impact. And I think what people are looking for, specifically the registrars, is that the methodology you use to disposition them, and that are you aware of the problems that could occur, and then you make appropriate decisions.
Very good. Another question. The criteria that for, you mentioned severity and occurrence, the same criteria that applies to the FMEA process, would that apply to the risk-based thinking, the risk register information that you showed?
Absolutely. A lot of FMEAs that I have done use a scale of 1 to 10. You could use a scale of 1 to 10. I have worked in one organization where we actually used the scale of 1 to 6. It's really up to the organization to figure out the scale what to use. I have worked in manufacturing organizations where the severity was in terms of percent failure, even going down to parts per million. I have seen businesses use severity where they've used dollars to define the level of severity. So it's really up to you, the organization, to decide. Scales 1 to 5 is not absolute. You could use 1 to 10. You could use 1 to 7. My feedback is be consistent across the organization with what you use.
Very good. Thank you. And let's see. We'll take one more question, and this has to do with the risks. So a lot of people commented on the difficulty of assigning probability of occurrence when it comes to risk-based thinking. And a few people asked about a more effective way in calculating probability of occurrence, especially if there's no historical data and information to be able to base that on. Can you comment on that, and maybe a little bit on the ability to, the need to update the risk registers or risk assessments over time as new information comes in?
Yeah, that's a good question, Angelo. You know, when you are planning a new process, maybe you have some legacy processes that you could estimate, but in many, many cases you really don't know. And it goes back to the whole notion of continual improvement. You assign a risk to an element, and then over time, in the continual improvement activity, is you are to measure the output. And if all of a sudden, as an example, let's say you implement a process and you expect it to yield 95%. And all of a sudden, after a period of time, you find out that it's yielding 75%. Well, obviously, you're not meeting expectations, and so all of a sudden, you've got to reassess these level of risks, and what new information do you have? The one thing people need to realize is risks will change over time. I'll give you a personal example. I've had to implement a new facility with a new process with a whole new workforce. In the first year, the biggest risk I had was hiring people, training people, and installing equipment. After 2 years, that risk went away. and I had other risks. So just because you do it one time doesn't mean that your risk didn't change over time. And yes, you should refresh whatever table you do have, or whatever listing, or whatever risk register you do have. And it should probably be linked to the frequency that you have your management reviews, unless a new risk would appear.
Some people may call that kind of a living process of updating based on new information and data that comes in.
Angela, whomever asked the question earlier, can we use FMEAs? FMEAs are known as living documents.
Right.
And an FMEA, at the end of the day, is really a risk register. So I think you're correct. I like your term. Yes, it should be a living document.
Right. So there was a few people that really appreciated the integration of the process approach with the risk-based approach and kind of the BDCA methodology. There was a lot of comments on the integration. Instead of having separate documents, separate systems or processes, if you will, for risk management and process management. It's the integration of all the. Can you comment a little bit on that in terms of how to implement an integrated type of risk management process approach, continual improvement process?
So up on the screen, you see the model. It's slide 31. Now, I'm just going to fill it out, by the way. So I'm having a difficult time telling you that I can do it all in one place. But clearly, what you have on slide 31 is what some people know as turtle diagrams. And with that diagram, one could identify what the process is, and you could put a little block in there where you see that red block, risks, where the process owner could actually list all the risks that he or she has, similar to how you would list things in the center block itself. What I've done with other clients is we take that unique process step with those risks and we extract them and put them in a risk register. And that's where we do the scoring. So in one place for the entire quality management system, we have all of the risks for the key process steps. And that will, in the future, become the input into management review. So that's, Angelo, how I've moved forward with some clients to implement risk-based thinking. You identify the risks in a simple diagram, turtle diagram here. You update that routinely. You extract those risks into a single risk register for the organization, and that's an input into the management review. And there may be better ways to do it. I just don't have a better example of how to do it.
No, that's fine, Bob. Thank you very much. And I think this is a good place to end. Thank you very much, Bob, for an excellent presentation. And again, I apologize to you and the audience for the technical glitch that we had. I hope everybody has gotten some information that you can go back into your jobs with and improve the risk-based thinking methodology at your company. So thank you very much for attending. The webinar has been recorded and it will be posted on the ASQ Audit Division website. And you should see a notice for an upcoming webinar in the near future. Hopefully, all of you will be able to join us. Thank you very much for attending, and hope to see you at the ASQ Audit Division Conference in Reno in October. Have a good day.